This is Sarah, my partner in crime for Security Working Group, and I'm JJ. We'll just go over a little bit about the history and the overview of where we started, where we are right now, and then we'll talk a little bit about the projects that we are working on currently and where we could use help. So, cool. And security is something that nobody really cares about until something is broken. Then people are there fixing that.
You have to speak up.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Like I say, security is something that people never really care about until something is broken. And when it's broken, then they are there fixing. So you'll never find many people here in the working group. But there are a lot of people that are subscribed to the Safe Working Group, which is like the CN Security SIG right now. So we'll generally go over the focus areas. So we honed in on some of the focus areas that we think we can handle as a help for TOC. Essentially around centralizing security. I think one of the problems that has been noticed but not addressed early on is a bunch of the infrastructure that comes up with same set of security problems, whether it's identity, authorization, auditing, or assessment of risk. Every infrastructure has the same set of concerns and same set of problems in similar set of ways, but then everybody addresses it in different projects. Right? So one of the goals for this is to basically bring them all together and then centralize it in a place where we could repurpose and reuse the knowledge gained from like one to the other, and then create a similar set of framework that can be reused everywhere. Right? And I think there is going to be a bunch of tooling that's going to happen along the way. We're basically starting at the beginning right now in terms of where the understanding is. So to give a brief background on history of how this all started. I mean, even prior to this, I think I was involved with SPIFFE way early on, because identity was like one of the common concerns that we noticed while I was still working at Twitter. Then SPIFFE was something that excited me in terms of like that being able to address identity across. It's a long way still, and it's a good start, but we are nowhere close to where it is. But that led to like bunch of concerns that are security related that needs to get centralized was the goal. And then we started socializing this idea around KubeCon Austin in December of 2017. Wow, it's been over a year. So the initial commit for Safe Repo happened around 13th March, done by Dan Shaw. So we had him over, and then we started building the community. Like a lot of people from different industries and different projects, some related to CNCF, some not. Like Cloud Foundry, Shri Tumidi, she participated heavily, and then she gave a lot of use cases that we leveraged off of, and then Google, of course. So we started that, and then there was a policy working group which had like somewhat of an overlap in terms of what we were doing and what they were doing. So we ended up collaborating together, which is a big thing for us and for security in general. I mean, like too many fragmented efforts is not going to go anywhere anyway, right? So that was one thing that happened, and then we went in for CNCF consideration around the same time when working groups there was debate about like working group versus SIGs starting to happen. So we went in there, then we became like the example of like how to create SIGs from a working group, and that started happening from 2018 like all the way up to now. And finally, like we had renaming of SAFE to CNCF Security SIG, and then now we are into we'd have to Yeah, there is a repo. Obviously, the links all point to a repo that you can see from here. But if you click on the link when it's shared, then you should be able to get to the repo that has all the governance.
So it's actually shared on the, if you're all online now, I uploaded it before this talk. So yeah. All the links are live. You can check it out afterwards if you like.
Yeah. So, I mean, it took some effort, but there were like so many people that were passionately excited about solving this problem that that was motivating for us to basically take this and move this forward. So I'll leave the slide for like few seconds at least for people to look at, and then I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Actually, I don't need the mic. I'm all mic'd up. So yeah, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about, while you all admire our awesome working group members who sort of came together to make this happen. And I think like a lot of the people in the group, I wasn't really passionate about corralling security experts across the internet. But I was facing a problem with the software that I was leading where people would criticize it for not doing X, Y, or Z and assume it did A, B, or C. And it was very hard to articulate exactly what we were doing and what we weren't doing because there wasn't a common vocabulary. Despite the fact that a lot of these security concepts have been around forever, I started doing internet software in the mid-90s, and the fundamentals are the same, except that things are quite different. And kind of agreeing on that common vocabulary is very challenging. We talk about identity. I was really interested in the SPIFFE project, and then I realized, oh, it's only solving service identity. Of course, I do a lot of application development. End user identity is a completely different thing, and a lot of these projects, you'd say, well, does your project do this? And the answer is, well, it could do that, which is not really the answer I want to know. I want to know, like, was it built to do that? If I adopt it, will that be normal to me? Am I braving a new frontier, or can I just use something off the shelf? And these answers are emerging, which can make it very challenging and time-consuming to do some basic stuff. So, so I'm going to dive into a couple of the projects we're doing just to give you a feel for what's going on in the group. And the idea is to give you all a sense of kind of the problems we're tackling and how we're going about it, so you can decide whether you want to just keep an eye on it, keep up to date on what's going on with CNCF and how we're helping to articulate solutions in cloud native security. Or whether you want to get involved and help us solve these problems. Because we're very much, as JJ said, at the beginning of explaining these things. Each of us has a lot of experience and solves these problems independently in our own context. But one of the special things about this group is that it includes people who are trying to figure out government policy or figuring out really novel or foundational solutions in academia that we can then apply in industry. We have people who are working on application development, people who are working on platforms, and all the different parts of this puzzle. And so that's one of the exciting things, is that together we can build a picture of it that no one of us has on our own. So the landscape is a big challenge. Any of us could just take these projects and plunk them down in categories, but we want to come up with categories that are useful. So a few members of the group got together and looked at the 567 projects that are in the CNCF landscape and identified 40 of them that are security related. These are both projects that are CNCF projects and many that are not, that are just projects that are in the landscape because people are using them. And we need to understand which ones are in active use and how they interoperate. So a number of categories got drafted. I just put a smattering up here because we're not set on this is the right set of categories and articulation of them. And it's a work in progress in order to put the project in those categories. And like all of the things we do, we validate the usefulness by trying out our frameworks before we say, this is our thing. And so the repo shows that. And there's an issue. If you want to help, you can chime in on issue 124. And our next step is to really figure out how we can use these categories to make it so that we can help people navigate both the security solutions and the security features of projects that are not security related. Because as you all may know, just because it's not a security project, or maybe because it's not a security project, you have to think more about what you're going to do with it in terms of security. Because these are thought through to varying degrees or documented to varying degrees by the projects themselves. So security assessments has been something that in the last 5 or 6 months, a number of us in the group have also been very active in. We put together, Justin Kapos, who's in the audience, put together the initial guidelines, and which were quite challenging to come up with something that we felt we could run through all the different projects and have a process that could be replicated by a large security team that might be not us, that might be from different companies, from different parts of the industry, so that somebody who was a security expert who understood the audit process would be able to scrub in and follow a process, and that it would make sense across multiple projects. So what we did was we volunteered in Toto, and Santiago Torres Arias was very generous with his time in going through this process, in fact, multiple times, so that we could figure out how would it work as a process. And we came up with, I'll just give a sort of sneak peek at the repo, if you haven't checked it out. And so we put together really just an outline of what we're trying to achieve here. And the first is really reducing risk across the ecosystem. Like, the security assessments are happening for a few different reasons. One reason is, well, there's a project that wants to join the CNCF, and the TOC wants to be able to say, so what's up with this project? It says it's doing security stuff. Is that, reasonable? Take a quick look at it first. And we could just do that, but we wanted to also seat this in some of the motivations of the wider part of many of the members of our group that are excited about the CNCF, but more excited about the opportunity that the CNCF presents in terms of aggregating all of these folks working on cloud things. So the motivation of a lot of the people in the group is we want to be using cloud native open source projects and not have that keep us up at night and be woken up in the middle of the night with a pager going off because bad things have happened. And risk is inevitable, but there are a lot of things that we can collectively do to reduce that risk. And so these security assessments are envisioned of being sort of two-sided. One is the review team, where 2 or 3 of us would sort of ask questions of the project and model the threats and discuss the potential malicious attack surface. And the project itself, we hope that they are getting value out of it. The first projects that are going through this are projects that have a lot of security experts on the team. So it's a delightful two-sided thing where they're helping inform the process as well as going through the process. But then we anticipate that this will be used to go through projects where there maybe isn't even a security expert on the team. Maybe the project maintainer, the lead maintainer, is going to act as the security expert. They've done the best they can, but there may be some things that they've missed. And this can be an education for projects that have less security focus. Can potentially highlight a need to companies that are using a project and might not be aware that there's a need for more staffing around security, or more attention, or better communication mechanisms, and things around the projects that aren't purely the execution of effective code. Because the engineers on the projects are generally pretty good, with some exceptions, on the code rigor. At least they have a list that they know they need to attack, or if you give them a list of coding things, that's tractable. Some of the things that I think the CNCF offers is this opportunity for us as an ecosystem, each of us to know where we're going to put our energies. And as somebody who's led a lot of projects myself that have open source dependencies, I want to know when I adopt a project, is this a project I can just use and rely on? Or is this a project that I'm adopting and now it's part of my team and I really need to assign somebody to shepherd it? And I think that by highlighting where a project is, and it's not a problem if a project is in the sort of more nascent category, it's an opportunity. And that we, as part of the CNCF, we have an opportunity to kind of create more security with that. And then by improving an understanding of security and a process and an artifact that is yielded from this process, where every project in the CNCF someday would have a document that's structured in a similar way, where people could, I've been in a situation where I have 50 open source dependencies and my new app now has to go through a security review at Big Co that I work for, and that is a lengthy process. Big Co security review team loves to have clear documentation that they can read. And so I hope that comes out of the process as well. So those are just a kind of like the why we're doing this. Later tomorrow, Justin Kapos and Justin Cormack are going to dive deeper into what do we actually do in the security review and some of the learnings from the assessments that have been done so far. So we have 4 people on our security review team right now. We're doing the first 2 through this new process with all 4 of us. And then the idea is that we're going to break off and have different ones of us lead the teams to go through this process multiple times. So we're looking for more people who have experience doing auditing of security projects for security, or people who are interested in learning that process. So the idea is if you want to learn about security, if you know somebody who wants to learn about security, you could shadow a few audits, participate, really help with the process, and then become somebody who could do them in the future and lead these things. So next up, our roadmap. So we, once we get this, with the security assessment process underway, we want to shift our focus, taking some of the learnings and the in-progress work around the landscape to put together a security overview white paper. What we've seen is that, as I was talking about, there's a lot of people who have different ways of describing the same things, and that's causing slowdowns in adoption of cloud-native technologies. And there's a huge number of companies where they have security experts who are new to cloud. And they need a guide of like, hey, how do you think about the cloud security things? And there are things that are unique to cloud. And then there's a whole other large group of people who are new to security and they really need a guide. And so we're working on this white paper. JJ's leading up the effort to crisp up an outline, and then we'll pull in more people to contribute to that. And then Howard is, I don't know if he's here today, but he's here at the conference, is leading up the effort with the policy white paper, and that will be figuring out how to factor some of the overview material into the security overview, and then address policy as its own topic. There's great debate about whether policy and security belong in the same working group, and basically what we came to is if you don't know what your policies are, if you can't articulate them in some way that lets you test them in an automated way or reason about them at least, then your system's not secure. And there's a bunch of things that policy generally controls that people don't. I feel like I'm in an airplane. So So the point is that there's a number of things that policies control that will affect the integrity of your system. You don't think of, many people don't think of quota, right, as affecting security. But if you don't have quotas, then somebody can really attack your system just by blowing up your resource usage. So policy is a really important concern for this group. And then we have a goal of completing 5 security assessments this year. And so we're in the midst of 2. We have 2 queued up, and then TBD. We'd like to identify a project that is not for security, but needs security. And Justin will talk more about that. So these are 2 places you can learn more. There's going to be a deep dive with Justin Kapos and Howard Huang tomorrow at 11 a.m. And then at 2, a deep dive into the project security reviews. And so I want to open this up for questions. And you need to come over to the mic. Can we get the mic on, please? Yeah, maybe you can. Here, wait.
I just wondered how this relates to the existing WD security audit. So Kubernetes and some of the other projects have like a third party, Cure 53 or whoever else.
Thanks for bringing that up. So the question is, there's third-party security audits that the CNCF does. And so the idea is that this security assessment would typically take place before the security audit. So this, like a sandbox project, a project which doesn't quite have its security act together, or ones that are just newer to CNCF, and then as a, and then Justin seems like he's going to have an answer to this.
Yeah, I just want to point out one thing.
Come over here. You can borrow this.
Yeah, I just want to point out one thing, which is that what we're doing isn't a security audit. We're not going line by line through the code looking for buffer overflows when we do this. This is a process that, from the standpoint of somebody who's participating in it, you're taking a few days to a week of your time to do it. And you're really trying to understand, are they solving a real problem? Do they have a reasonable approach? Are they doing things like, is there risk in their code base in that? Are they doing like code review and testing and those sorts of things at that level? But the idea is to lay the groundwork for a later kind of line-by-line assessment that you would get from a Trail of Bits or a Cure 53 or another professional pen tester like that. So if you don't have that level of expertise, don't be scared to participate in or shadow one of these, because you just really need the ability to think about like what can possibly go wrong with this software and how, what could go wrong in different ways that people use it. So yeah.
Thanks, Justin. Other questions? Or things you'd like to learn more about? I think this is working now.
So yeah, you've talked about wanting people to get involved, but you haven't actually said how. Is that URL going to tell us how?
Yes, so the question is, people get involved. So this URL will tell you how. There's, in the README, there is a mailing list and the channel on the CNCF Slack. And so you can just chime in, and if you want to join the security review team, just shout out on Slack or on the mailing list, and Justin or one of our little core security review team will eagerly shout out to you. And the weekly meetings on Wednesdays at what time in this time zone? 1 p.m. Eastern. 6 p.m. UK. 7 p.m. in this time zone in Barcelona, and 10 a.m. in Pacific time zone. And if you're in China, I think we're in the middle of the night. Although people do come. Yes. And then there's also issues. So we definitely invite you to like chime in on things that you think you're interested in and you'd like to work on. And where most of the work has historically happened at, like, coordination has happened at the meetings, and we're trying to get a little better at the asynchronous stuff so that folks in other time zones have an easier time participating. Great question. So I'm curious of people in the audience, whether the kinds of things that we've been talking about, like whether you have security challenges like what we've been talking about, or if you have other security challenges that we haven't talked about, definitely also interested in hearing. So I will continue to ask you questions if you want to ask. So who in the room considers themselves a security expert? Okay, who in your room does security stuff as part of your work? Okay, that's probably like 2/3 of the audience. I think it's all good that many of us are cautious about considering ourselves security experts. And then of other folks in the room, who is leading a company and needs to worry about security? Less of those. Leading a product? Few. All right. So who is using Kubernetes in production? Who is using something that is not Kubernetes in production? Probably half and half. Some of the same people. I think we all deploy a lot of stuff. Who has had to respond to a security incident in the last year? I would say that's, maybe 20% of the room, 30%. Is that on?
That does raise an interesting question, though. Security responses are haphazard in the open source community. So I should confess first that this is my first interaction with CNCF, but I've got wider open source experience. Does the SIG help drive security response for CNCF projects?
That's a great question about sometimes responses to security concerns are certainly not in a regular, you never know what you're going to get with your open source project, right? You have to look at the specific open source project. And that's actually something that's come up in the reviews, is how much are we in the assessment going to worry about things like that. And so we actually sort of created a category to make sure that that's explained and identified that, well, maybe the guidelines need to be improved a bit, and maybe we can do a better job of giving projects advice. And so that's one of the things that's really coming out of these security assessments, is areas where we all kind of chime in and say, well, you should be doing this, and you should be doing that. And then we're all like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe we should write that down, tell the other projects. So we aspire to have those guidelines. Some of them, like the CII best practices, touches on a lot of these things, but there's a lot that is not covered yet. So definitely, I think something that we would like to be able to produce in the next year or so.
The general idea is to centralize all the knowledge that you have and be a little bit more prescriptive about like what should be done, what can be done, but not necessarily being a certifying things that you can or cannot use, right? So there's two different things, and there is enough amount of knowledge and information that we can actually gather to be more prescriptive about things that will itself help you in getting a secure system in your production. But the other part of like being a certifying body or something equivalent to like what Justin was saying, we can audit your entire code base to say that this is clear of all the vulnerabilities that we know of, is not something that we are signing up to do.
Yeah, and I think we're also not going to be like actually responding to security vulnerabilities, but I think it's more like collecting what's working.
Sorry, yeah, I was just saying, can we standardize oh, can we recommend a standardized reporting infrastructure and try and ensure that those reports do actually go to the right people, because project maintainers change and people may or may not follow the issue tracker may move and someone puts it in the old issue tracker. So if there's a guideline for both a centralized reporting infrastructure, but equally as importantly, helping maintainers understand how to deal with a report in a responsible manner, that could be, and once again, you know, I'm assessing the entire open source community. I don't have a lot of CNCF experience, but that's something I've seen as a gap in.
Yeah, so the question was, it was really an observation that there's this gap, and that we believe that just simply by saying, here are a bunch of good practices, here are some templates, hey, we recommend you have like, here are some ways to engage people to get more people on your security team, you know, and being a resource so that when people have to tackle a vulnerability that they have a group to come to. I think that like we see that as a really good opportunity to just create a more healthy ecosystem. And I think one of the things that we ask projects to do is to look at their dependencies. And that if we created rigor around everybody updating their dependencies, which I think happens pretty actively for the big projects, but some of the smaller projects, you know, are maybe not as rigorous about that. And I think just creating a practice that is easy to follow, a default that you can just sort of pick up and go with, these are the things that we don't have to mandate. People want to do the right thing when it's easy. And then if it's contentious, we can say, look, there are some different opinions here. And generally, we're comfortable taking that approach. There's a question about, you want to come forward?
The question was just around, so some projects from CNCF, when they go up through the ranks, they may consider some security primitives not their issue. So as an example, they may say authentication is not our problem. Is there a plan to have security sort of try and guide them in the right direction of perhaps you should consider authentication as part of your problem?
So that is a great question that is under hot discussion amongst our group members. So the question was really that a project might say, well, security is not our concern. Authentication is not our problem. Use our stuff and it's up to you. And so there are some people in the group who think that's nutty. And other people in the group think, well, under a certain condition, maybe that's reasonable. However, what's probably not reasonable is for users not to know that that is the case. And so that's one of the things that we're talking about. We're actually going to schedule a working group meeting to talk about how we handle that. Because with the security assessments right now, they've been very friendly. Anything that's been brought up, we've come up with a way to handle it. But what if we did a security assessment and the project was disagreed? What if the security reviewers disagreed amongst themselves? So we want to talk through some example cases of, well, what if, right? What if we were assessing a project and they held an opinion that was different from the reviewers, right? We're not going to be arbiters of that. We don't have to be right. What we have the opportunity to do is bubble it up to the TOC, the Technical Oversight Committee, and the CNCF in a digestible way. Make it clear what's going on, and then other folks can decide what to do with that. But this is a great and interesting question. Come to our working group meetings and we will discuss it and figure it out together. All right, I think that we are out of time. So if you had other questions or if you want to talk about getting involved, come to one of these other sessions and we'll also hang out a little while more today. Thanks, everyone.